Ladies and gentlemen, it is over. The Philadelphia Phillies have officially been eliminated from the MLB playoffs at the hands of the New York Mets in a 4-1 loss at Citi Field to ultimately end the series 3-1 in the Mets' favor. This is not one that just means it is over for this playoff series. Yes, the Phillies season is over, but this is one that should mean it's over for this era of Phillies baseball. This is the type of loss, the type of year-to-year regression that should drive change within a serious organization that has hopes of winning a World Series, and there should be the results that prove that at the end of this offseason. I want to talk a little bit about what went wrong, why I'm so frustrated with this team. If you want to point fingers, there's plenty to go around here. You can look directly at the bats, which I think is where the primary blame should come, that your money men, the guys that are making those big ticket figures, the Trey Turners of the world, the guys that you count on to step up, did not get the job done. The bats were just far too lifeless from this series as a whole. You want to look at the pitching staff. Zack Wheeler was excellent. Ranger Suarez did his job tonight. The bullpen, not at all. And when you want to look at the manager, Rob Thomson, did not pull the right strings from start to finish this season, really this series. You can talk about if you want to go back throughout the entirety of the year. I do think there is this loser vibe that was kind of given out by Rob Thomson. The decisions to not use Bryce Harper as a pinch hitter in his off day, or not use JT Realmuto as a pinch hitter in their off day, or decisions to kind of punt games and keep low leverage arms out there for the sake of staying healthy for the playoffs. Well, look where that got you. Now look at this direct playoff series. We're talking about his mismanagement of the bullpen. That I understand you didn't have a ton of good choices there to address the bullpen stuff head on here. We're talking about Jeff Hoffman with a 40.5 ERA for the postseason. Matt Strom, a 36 ERA. Jose Alvarado, 27 ERA. Those are atrocious figures for guys who should be your high leverage opportunities. The guys that should be able to get you out of whatever situation, that have been some of the best relievers in all of baseball this year, just did not get the job done. Before Thomson, when looking at this game, you debatably left Ranger on the mound for way too long, and shout out to Ranger to give the full acknowledgement here for what Ranger's performance looked like. We're talking about a guy who went 4.1 innings, allowed 5 hits, no runs, 4 walks, and 8 strikeouts, pitched himself out of multiple jams, including in the first and second inning where he really pitched into about 9 outs. Alec Boehm just really wasn't able to take care of business and field his position to give this team a clean chance, but shout out to Ranger for pitching through it. Ranger should have the right to go up and shave Alec Boehm's hair right off his head. But anyway, with Ranger, and by the way, to acknowledge how good that he has been, we're talking about the lowest ERA in postseason history. Ranger 4th all-time in Major League Baseball, 1.43, that including the 4 1/3 scoreless tonight. And by the way, this coming on after a really bad second half of the season. Was terrific through the first half, really struggled in the second half, looked like he had a dead arm, in my opinion, there, and ultimately he pitched through it and found a way for this team. That is the type of heart that I want to see in a Phillies baseball player. That is the type of gutsiness, not being flapped by the moment, that Ranger has, and not enough on this roster do. Now, back to Rob Thomson here. I do think he might have left Ranger out there a bit too long, but ultimately, Ranger's a dog. He fought through it. Then in comes Jeff Hoffman as your next option there. Hoffman did great in his first 2/3 of an inning, got through it. Then very clearly did not have it in that second time on the mound. Now, in fairness to Jeff here, I understand a slightly different situation. You're coming in earlier in the game than you're accustomed to, that you did have to wait through 2 pitching chains while the Phillies were up at bat. That's a long time in the dugout to come back out there. But from when he started that inning, it was immediately clear he did not have it. The control was not there, couldn't get it over the plate, and ultimately ended with the bases loaded where they have to make a pitching change, and Carlos Estevez come walking down, and in the first batter that he faces, Francisco Lindor launches one 8 million feet over the fence for a grand slam and to take the lead here. This, when looking at Rob Thomson, was your management, your decision to do that? Again, I understand you didn't have a ton of options here. But to go back to the options conversation, we can also point that finger directly at Dave Dombrowski in the front office because it straight up was not good enough this year. Your 2 massive deadline acquisitions on this team that was World Series or bust is what we've been told since spring training. Your 2 massive deadline acquisitions were Austin Hayes, who, by the way, was terrible in the games that he did play and wasn't a guy that you could count on to be an everyday outfielder. He was not the one-time all-star that he proved to be, not a guy this team could count on. That was your one acquisition there. And your other was the guy who allowed the game-losing grand slam. A closer who could not pitch in a number of situations. A guy who is supposed to be the guy that you can count on in the bottom of the ninth. That was the concept when the trade first went down. It was clear he wasn't quite that I understand Thomson's concept of high leverage situations. I have my own battles with that I disagree with it from the standpoint of you're playing 9 innings regardless of the situation. So I understand what a high leverage spot is and the matchups and playing those things. But the bottom line is when you burn a guy early, you don't get him back. And ultimately, Esmez proved not to be the guy regardless there. So there's blame to go around for each and every one of those. And to kind of highlight the box score, specifically each of these guys that came up short, again, plenty of fingers to point. Kyle Schwarber on the day, 4 at-bats, 3 strikeouts, including the final out. Trey Turner, 4 at-bats, 2 strikeouts, 0 hits there. Bryce Harper played well today. 3 at-bats, 1 hit, 1 run, had a walk as well. Nick Castellanos also did his thing, had 2 hits in his 4 at-bats. Not mad at Cassie, who, by the way, had the walk-off. Can't be too mad at that guy. He has earned his stripes a bit more. Shout out to Cassie for this season, a guy that I think goes underrated and overhated at times. Alec Boehm, a guy who is underhated and overappreciated. 3 at-bats in this game, did have 1 walk. Nothing to show for, no hits. No, I guess he did kind of have the RBI here. I guess they ruled it as an error, so he does get in the box score. Went about 5 feet in front of the plate, but ultimately a run is a run, and I do take that at the time. But beyond that, the field was disastrous today. We're talking about him at third base in that first inning. Should have had an opportunity to turn 2. Went to tag the runner out, running right in front of him, was unable to place the tag, then got caught up in the transition, late throw to first, and ultimately gets no outs there. Then that very next inning, a routine ground ball to third, in which Boehm was caught in between once again, couldn't figure out what to do. Do I throw to first? Do I try and tag this guy running right in front of me? And ultimately get 0 outs, one again. That's unacceptable stuff. And for all this like daycare stuff with Alec Boehm specifically to pull up his stats on the season here, it just has to be better. I understand he was unbelievable through the first half of the season. A real deal all-star, a guy who started representing the Phillies at third base in the all-star game, a part of the infield there, but he's just not consistent enough for what the Phillies need. He does not have the power that the Phillies need, that you truly need at the third base position there. Boehm, I very much think, will not be back in a Phillies uniform next year, and we will dig deeper into that throughout the offseason here. But I do think it is telling that he was the first guy that was benched when this team needed a jolt of energy, as Rob Thomson said. To put Edmundo Sosa in this lineup, it was Alec Boehm that needed to be retracted. To me, that's a little bit telling that is the guy you're going to. I do think the poutiness, the slam in the hat, breaking bats, throwing a hissy fit on the field, that's stuff that seems to be wearing more on this Phillies team internally than I think has been publicly made well aware. So I'm curious if there's some more whispers and rumbles that continue to leak out in the coming weeks now that the season is finally complete. But I do think Boehm is at the top of my list for a guy that I do not expect to be back next year, and I'm curious to see how that plays itself out. Now, a couple of the other daycare members that I did want to mention. Bryson Stott. I know he did have the triple, the RBIs in a previous game, but another guy that I think there needs to be a tough conversation about is, yes, Bryson Stott's a good player, but is he a World Series winner, a guy that can get you over the edge? And some of this is me kind of projecting on Stott for a little bit with the reality that I just don't think Trey Turner is that guy. That we signed Trey Turner to be like a co-star to Bryce Harper, that you should be one of these feature faces. The reality is he's not. He's a below average defensive shortstop whose hit tool is not good enough to make up for that. That yes, he had a better year than last year, but he's still well below his average, his OBS, his OPS for his career, for what he produced in a Dodgers uniform, for what did happen in Philadelphia here. It just has to be better. And I understand money's money. The contract has been made. The decision has been made as this is the investment that the Phillies decided to pull. But the reality is I just don't think Trey Turner is that level of guy for what his 11-year, $300 million contract commands. And that's not one the Phillies are going to get off of. That isn't an opportunity to flip that, move on. You're stuck. You made that decision. You're locked in with this one. You got to figure it out. So that's kind of my conversation with Bryson Stott here. I even will hear the argument if you want to swing it to me this way, or if we can find a way to make this happen. Throw Stott at shortstop and throw Turner at second base. Maybe we can figure something out there. But we also need more concrete and regular plate appearances from Bryson Stott. This is a guy who did not hit well throughout the entirety of the season. Had a couple stretches where he looked fine, but the reality is it's still got to be better. Then this outfield conversation, there's a lot that needs to go on out there. Is Johan Rojas a guy who you believe can be the center fielder of the future? Because if you think that's the case, it did not seem to be indicated by this series. He did not step on the field whatsoever today. You went with a better approach from a hitting standpoint by putting Brandon Marsh out there, but they didn't work out too hot, as Marsh on the day, ultimately in his 4 at-bats, did have 1 hit, so I will give him credit there, but also struck out and looked pretty lifeless at the plate as well. Another guy who went down at the end of it. Now, when talking about this Phillies team as a whole, they were up 3-2 in the NLCS last year. Since then, they have lost 5 of 6 playoffs games. They have scored a total of 8 runs in those 5 losses. We can talk bullpen, we can talk manager, etc. But the bottom line is you have no chance with that offensive output. That is how this Phillies team was constructed. That you brought in Kyle Schwarber, you brought in Nick Castellanos, you built around Bryce Harper, you signed JT Realmuto to an extension. The concept is this team is supposed to mash runs. This team is built to hit, and they haven't done it. And I do think that there needs to be some hard-hitting evaluation and conversations had because of this. This team has been this like fun, exciting run for this era of Phillies baseball that they seem to catch lightning in the bottle, catch teams off by surprise, and make that World Series run. Well, now you have the burden of expectation, and you have to build off that on a year-by-year basis, and they haven't. They now are eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. I guess they got past the wild card, whatever. You can call that a win if you want to look at it that way, that they didn't have to scrap out of that first round. But the reality is this team has regressed from a postseason outlook standpoint. If the goal is to win a World Series, then you got to prove it to me this offseason. We're going to have some difficult conversations about what the future of this team is. Ultimately, hat tip to the Mets. You guys played a great series. You guys look like a fearful team. You look like the team of destiny that we hope this Phillies team had become, that we had seen versions of this Phillies team look like in years past. So shout out to the Mets. Go take a World Series. I don't have any hate in my heart for this team. I have more hate in my heart for this Phillies team right now for not being who we thought they were. So ultimately, it's going to be a long offseason ahead. We have plenty of time to stew on these decisions, work the margins, and figure out how we get better from here. Is it Juan Soto? Are we going big game hunting in this offseason? I do know Dave Dombrowski will not rest until he has the right guys to ultimately pursue a World Series. They're better act quick because there is a lot of work to do on this roster, and I think there's some uncomfortable conversations needed to be had about some bigger names on this roster than people would like to acknowledge. We're going to get into every bit of that right here on Phillies Digest throughout the offseason. Just had to rant out after the immediate final out in this game here, so appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning into this video here, as well as any others throughout the season. We're going to be around for the foreseeable future, going to do things even better in year 2, so make sure you're riding along with us right here on Phillies Digest, dropping a like on this video, dropping your comments below, and subscribing to the channel if you have not already. Again, appreciate each and every one of you, and I do have faith that this Phillies team will get it right, but it's going to be a long offseason again ahead of us. Peace.